Officer Ontiveros, go ahead when you're ready. Mrs. Grail James is joining us via Skype tonight, correct? Is that Skype that we're using? Can you hear Ms. James?
I can hear you,
Okay,
and
perfect.
I can see you.
Okay, good. Thank
Can
you.
you?
Yeah, we need to see Grail bigger.
Ha! Wait a minute. I don't want to be bigger.
Can we turn down her microphone a little bit, please? There we go. All right, go ahead, officer.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. May I have your attention, please? Before we begin this meeting, that we ask everyone to silence your cell phones. The Fort Bend ISD Board of Trustee meeting is an open meeting for the public to address the board, observe the board conducting district business. Therefore, audience members may address the board during the designated audience items section on the agenda. If you have any printed materials you want to give to the board members, you must provide them to the board secretary, Norma Perez, or to me, and we will provide them to the board. We also ask the members of the audience be respectful of others and remain quiet during the meeting so that everyone's able to hear the proceedings. For your convenience, microphones have been provided on both sides of the boardroom. Please speak directly into the microphone if you're asked to answer a question or address the board during the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, officer. The time is 6:01 p.m. and this meeting is hereby called to order. We have the presence of a quorum and the meeting has been duly called and notice of the meeting has been posted for the time and manner required by law. Please rise for the pledges of allegiance and remain standing for the silent invocation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to Texas, one state under God, indivisible.
Please remain standing for the silent invocation. You may be seated. First up this evening on our agenda are our recognitions. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, Mr. President, it's always an honor to recognize our outstanding students and staff. So if the board members would join me in front of the dais, we'll get busy celebrating our students and their success.
Mr. President, Superintendent Dupree, members of the board, we have some outstanding students tonight, and we're going to start with a special fifth grader from Walker Station Elementary. Can I please have Miss Suhana Goudet come forward, please? She was chosen by her principal to lead the Pledge of Allegiance for us. Sahana is a Walker Station Spelling Bee winner, and she's gone on to participate in the District Spelling Bee and the Houston Public Media Spelling Bee. In May, she will be competing in the National Spelling Bee. We're going to wish her lots of luck. Good job. Next, we have a great group of students from James Bowie Middle School as they start making their way in. This is the National Junior Honor Society chapter, and they received the Outstanding Service Project. First, we're going to ask our officers, Daniela Utugbo, to come forward. Samantha McCoy. Bailey Greer. And our sponsor, Mrs. Joey Dairu Lang. And they were recognized for collecting supplies, and this is an outstanding group of leaders, so let's congratulate Bowie one more time. Great job, Bowie. Good job on that spelling bee. We'll be rooting for you. Next, we have members of the Ridgepoint High School Academic Decathlon team. They were big winners at the 2019 Academic Decathlon Texas Championship meet. So I'd like to invite Ms. Haley Curry, first place winner in honors speech, scoring a perfect 1,000 points. Next, we have Brady Sanders, second place in the Scholastic interview with a near perfect score of 993.3. Next, we have Connor Slacks, second place in varsity economics. And a big thanks to Craig Sanders, our sponsor. Very good. Ridgepoint High School Academic Decathlon team. Next, we have another outstanding group of students, members for the Hightower High School Future Business Leaders of America team. They were winners at the State Leadership Conference. The following students will also be advancing to the National Leadership Conference this summer, so good job for them. Can we please have Ms. Sarah McNoji and Susan Varghese, third place winners in 3D animation. Next, we have Edwin Paul, second place, American Enterprise Project. Hafsa Moe, second place, Community Service Project. Can we please have Amber Ayub and Christina Kurilvilla come forward with Zane Moen, first place digital video production. And then second place winner for partnership with business, we have Prunava Theodarajan. Close? Yep. Kenneth Thomas, second place, sales presentation. And we also have Mr. Daryl Tran, third place, networking concepts. And a big round of applause for our sponsor, Lou Barrett. Great job from Hightower High School. We're going to get a group picture. Okay. Students, you'll need to move towards the front. Yes. Thank you. Tall folks in the back, shorter folks in the front. You know who you are. How's that?
I can't see Kristen.
All right. All right, we're looking.
Yes.
There you go. Hold it.
Ready, guys? 1, 2, and 3. Beautiful. Thank you.
Good job. We've got another group of outstanding students from Fort Settlement Middle School. This is our Science Bowl team. They went undefeated at the Texas A&M Junior Science Bowl. Very exciting. The team will go on to represent Fort Bend at the National Science Bowl competition later this month, so we'll be cheering them on. We've got a group of students here. We've got Anisha Parsan. If you want to come forward and shake hands. Siddharth Rajesh. Miss Amy Chang. Sharam Padamonabon. Siddharth Dice. And our outstanding sponsor, Karen Staley. Good job to Fort Settlement students. We're going to have you get in the middle so you can take a picture.
Over here on 3, 1, 2, and 3.
Good job. Fort Settlement Middle School Science Bowl team, congratulations. Good luck. And we have one more outstanding recognition. This is for Jason McRipley. He's a teacher at Meadows Elementary. He was our third place runner-up for the Houston Area Alliance of Black School Educators. If he could please come forward and be recognized by the board.
On 3, 1, 2, and 3.
Great job. Thank you so much for representing Fort Bend so well. That concludes our recognition.
Okay, next we have our audience items. First up is VJ here. Mr. VJ. Hello, sir. Thank you for being here. Please step up to the mic. You'll have 3 minutes. Mr. Rosenthal will give you a 30-second warning.
Good evening, Board of Trustees and Dr. Dupree. I have 2 items to request for the board to consider. The first item, which I'm talking to be, is last month the board approved unanimously to move some section of Riverstone from First Settlement to First Colony, which is around 383 kids. Out of 383 kids, as per the admin, 93 of them are rising 8th graders. As one of the parent of the rising 8th grader, we have put in a tough spot that, you know, it's not just first time we are being rezoned. My son was rezoned before when Commonwealth to Ann Sullivan. We took the choice to move to Ann Sullivan, even though we couldn't able to provide the transportation. But the same situation we were put in right now, that being 8th grader, it's just not about transportation. The kids have been worked hard to come to a level. My son is in band, he's now in symphonic band, and he's working towards hard to get to honors band in First Settlement band. And now moving to him to First Colony, it's going to be a tough choice for him to fit into the band and get in. So same situation for many of the kids and many of the parents. So most of the parents are planning to put their kids stay in First Settlement, but transportation is going to be a biggest problem. So I know board already said transportation is not be provided, but I want to give few exceptions for the board to consider maybe this time, because board has always enact the thing the next year, not the immediate year. But in this situation, you guys enacted the thing on the rezoning immediately this year. It never happened from my thing, so maybe you have given an exception to enact it rezoning immediately. Maybe you have to give an exception in this case to give a transportation also for the 8th graders. Also, on February meeting, Commonwealth or the people around First Settlement has said traffic is the biggest problem in First Settlement. By allowing 99 parents to travel to Fort Settlement, that's going to worsen the situation more. So maybe consider that also as a reason. Also, in the past, Fort Settlement, the board has allowed also transportation with the additional cost. I think 3 years ago they allowed additional transportation with the cost. So I request you to consider this, even though it's additional cost, please consider providing the transportation for the 8th graders to Fort Settlement. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Up next, Mr. Jerry Monroe. Thank you for being here this evening, sir.
Last month, I said something about one of your schools. Today, I talked to Mr. Rodriguez. You got a lot of mold over in Progressive. You've got a lot of mold that's been there all year. I had the mold tested. I didn't go on your campus. Got the mold tested. You cannot just keep painting over mold. You're gonna make it spread. It's smelling. Didn't you have an ambulance there this morning? We never talked about that part. One of your people rolled out of there with respiratory issues. So you may need to look at that. Also, your water that the kids drink out of the water fountain, I had that tested. That's contaminated. So I think you need to give serious consideration to addressing that, which I heard that has already came across your desk. Get them kids out of their school. Put them somewhere for a few days, figure it out, move on from it. Earlier this month, I met a family from Sci-Fi, had a 10-year-old son, and he was bullied. And one day Kevin came home and he hung himself. I get a lot of bullying stuff from a lot of school districts. You notice tonight is not the theatrics because that case bothered me. And I really need school districts to take this serious. Sci-Fi is gonna learn a valuable lesson, a $10 million lesson. Because I'm gonna use state law, Davis law, because you knew that baby was being bullied, you did nothing about it, you lied about it, and you got caught. I'm asking you, when you get the serious bullying complaints, address them. Bullying has no color. Bullying is black kids, white kid, Asian, Indian, and a lot of kids across the country are dying because they can't deal with the anxiety that comes with it. I'm pleading with you. I got a lot of stuff coming across my desk for your district, but I've yet to even address it. So I'm coming to you so that you can get together and figure out something where you can address it to make your schools and your school principals take this stuff a little bit more serious. All right? Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Next up, Mita Thakur. Hope I said that halfway decent. You can step up to this microphone right here and just make sure it's turned on. You'll have 3 minutes, and Mr. Rosenthal will give you a 2.5-minute warning, or 30-second warning, excuse me.
Good evening, Dr. Dupree and respected board members. My name is Mita Thakur, and I am from Old Orchard. I just wanted to give you a little bit background about Old Orchard. Old Orchard was previously zoned to Oakland Elementary. It's 6.2 miles away from Old Orchard. We were then moved to Madden Elementary when that got built, and that's much closer. In 2017, because Madden was capped, new residents kids go to Oyster Creek Elementary. So we got split. And now we've received notice that our kids will go half year to Mission Bend Elementary and half year to Malala. It does not make sense for our kids to be zoned to 5 different elementaries before they cross 5th grade. That's too many schools. It's really hard for a parent. There are lots of parents which are going to be half in Oyster Creek. In fact, Oyster Creek is going to be kindergarten, and 1st grade is going to be Oyster Creek. 2nd to 5th grade is going to be Mission Bend. So we have like 3-4 different schools going on for Old Orchard. I'm not sure how this decision came across. This was not what was reported to us during the information meeting. And I would like somebody to seriously think about this before moving the kids around. They need stability. We are molding them at this level. And especially my child and other fifth graders are going to have a hard time. They're going to transition to middle school very soon. So from one elementary half the year, then a second elementary the second year, and then go on to sixth grade a year from now, that's going to be a lot of anxiety. Kids are going to be scared. They're not familiar with it. Their grades will be affected. They'll be at a disadvantage because this decision was made without even talking to us, without even thinking about the kids in particular. We also have a lot of parents who have kids which are going to be first grade and kindergarten, and they're going to have the two kids are going to go in two different elementaries. So how is a parent supposed to go to two different bus stops every day? How does a parent go to two different open houses, two different meet the teachers, and two different school events?
30 seconds.
On this basis. So I think it's very important that this decision be reviewed. I have a solution. Let's keep them for a whole year at Madden, one more year. Let's keep them at Madden or speed up the process for the construction of the new elementary, Malala, so they all can move together. That will really be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Next, Naima Sania. Could you tell me your name?
Nima Sane.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Hello, my name is Nima Sane, and this is Apurva Verghese. We're co-presidents of Eastern Imperium, and we have a proposal for change in the consent education for the health curriculum. According to the results of the National Survey of Adolescents, 8% of the sample reported 8% of the sample reported having been victims of sexual assault. 74% of these sexual assault victims indicated that they had been assaulted by someone they knew very well. 32% were friends, 21% were family members, 23% were strangers. Another 15% occurred at the victim's school. With the excessive amount of high school and college rape cases, with an estimated 11% of students on college campuses suffering from some form of sexual assault, it becomes incredibly apparent that there is a need for a new approach to stunting rape culture. According to Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance, the years between the ages of 11 to 16 are a critical period for apprehension of ways to treat your partner. However, in the current health curriculum, consent is not a required concept to be taught, despite its plethora of benefits to both the physical and emotional success of a student. In the current health curriculum, consent is often taught from the perspective of the victim, such as the phrases "just say no," or the amount of focus that educators put into discussing peer pressure. However, because sexual assault cases inherently suggest a lack of consent or ability to consent, this method is completely ineffective in preventing assault cases. Rather, it is essential for the district to focus on the point of view of the attacker as well as that of the victim. The current curriculum in Fort Bend ISD needs to be reformed to explicitly include education on consent. The education needs to center on the importance of teaching high schoolers how to recognize consent or lack thereof. Education on consent should focus on several scenarios, including teaching students to recognize consent from others, understanding the different forms of consent, both verbal and nonverbal, and teaching students who are victims of sexual assault to recognize the issues that they are facing. By teaching students the correct way to treat others in terms of consent, this will present an opportunity to significantly decrease the amount of sexual assault incidents in high school, college, and life. Additionally, by teaching students what consent is, it allows any student currently experiencing sexual assault at home to recognize that what they are experiencing is not normal but wrong. This is a simple solution that does not require many changes. A simple one-week course in high school health in which students are taught what consent is and the effects of refusal to receive consent before action would be beneficial. This revision also requires absolutely no funding. Ultimately, it can be seen that in the status quo, there is a significant problem in regards to the proliferation of rape culture. This problem also has a direct correlation with the knowledge of consent. Therefore, in order to stunt this problem, it is a necessity to add consent education to the health curriculum in Fort Bend ISD. In order to assure the physical and emotional safety of students, we must shift the focus of consent education from the victim to the attacker. This education would aid in preventing the long-lasting effects of sexual assault and sexual harassment at no cost and minimal revisions to the high school health curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on, we have information items next, but we're going to switch the 2019-20 budget update with the pre-K and early literacy center expansion update. Dr. Dupree?
Yes, sir. We're going to spend a few minutes this evening talk about the district's longer-range plans to expand our pre-K program from a half-day program to a full-day program. And our Chief Academic Officer, Deanna Saavedra, is going to lead that discussion.
Good evening, President Burdine, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Dupree. As Dr. Dupree indicated, this evening we'll be sharing some information regarding pre-K and the expansion planning that we've been doing thus far. Our presentation will consist of sharing the benefits of full-day pre-K with you. Mr. Bassett will then share potential legislative changes and information on charter schools. He'll also share the budgetary impact associated with a possible expansion to full-day pre-K. We'll talk about the planning measures that we've taken thus far, and then we'll end with the plan forward. So as we begin, as we typically do, we're going to begin by sharing some research with you on the primary purpose for pre-K programs, which is to ensure that we have students who are kinder ready. And so what does that mean? Specifically, in a pre-K learning environment, it offers our students the opportunity to expand their listening and speaking skills, to enrich their vocabulary, refine their social use of language, and further develop their grammar and alphabet skills and alphabet recognition. Building those literacy and numeracy skills really sets the foundation for our students and propels them to be successful within our system. In addition, as you see on the screen, pre-K offerings also promote social and emotional development, which are important to helping our students understand the healthy development of peer-to-peer relationships and learning how to appropriately deal with conflict. Through also interactive play and motor skills development, our students learn about the world around them, they learn how to problem solve, and they learn to work independently as well as learning to work with others in a formal school setting. So as we take all of these things into consideration, I want to share with you what our current model is with pre-K. Currently, Fort Bend ISD offers half-day pre-K in accordance with the adopted state model. We currently have 18 campuses in 2018-19 who offer half-day pre-K. In terms of full day, the first time that we offered full day options in Fort Bend ISD was in the 17-18 school year, where we launched a pilot in the Richmont Early Childhood Center with Baker Ripley. Since that time, we've expanded those options via the Early Literacy Center, where our Willow Ridge feeder pattern services full-day pre-K for our students, and we also have a full-day pre-K options at our Hunters Glen campus. So in terms of the benefits for full-day pre-K, in the next two slides, I want to show you a comparison of our literacy and numeracy achievement gains in comparing our half-day to our full-day options. Although you'll notice on the slide, on the next two slides, although we do see gains in both program models, we see a significant achievement at a higher rate when we compare our full-day programs to our half-day programs. Specifically, if you look on the slide here, when we think about our monolingual students associated with literacy, they grow at a rate of 14% in a half-day program as opposed to 24% in a full-day program. That is significantly higher for our bilingual students when we look at their gains in a half-day program as opposed to a full-day program. The same holds true for numeracy. If you notice, for our monolingual students in half-day, we go from a 6% gain to an 11% gain at middle of the year, and then 22% for our bilingual students and a 36% gain for our bilingual students in full-day programs. So a great benefit with respect to what we see and building that foundation for our students. Steve?
Thank you, Deanna. So you've seen some of this slide before. So this is, right now, what's included in both bills is to have pre-K mandatory for eligible 4-year-olds. So what does that mean? It means that we would be required to offer it for eligible 4-year-olds. It doesn't mean that if they choose not to attend, that we would have to send truant officers or anything along those lines. What we did with regular education, but we would it would be mandatory for us to offer it. So you could look at that a couple different ways, but we would have to offer it. Now, once they enroll, we would certainly expect attendance, and so anyway, so that's what that means. The standard funding still applies with a half day, and so the way that they've put together the plan to fund the second half of pre-K is to offer 0.1 of a weight in the basic allotment for every educational disadvantaged student between K and 3, and then they're also adding in, though, 0.1 for each ELL student between K and 3. Last week when I showed you those numbers, it was 5.3 million. The delta, and the reason why it goes up is up to 8.1 is because we weren't including the ELL numbers before. We didn't have those, and so we have that, and that's what that would mean for us. Now, the other important thing, though, to realize is that while that's what our allotment would be, this is already accounted for in the revenue projections that we've been given by the Legislative Budget Board. Okay, and so anyway, it is 8.1, and the intent is to use that for pre-K. So before we get into, we're looking at this, and I think we probably would have had this discussion in the fall, but because mandatory pre-K is in both the House bill and the Senate bill, we really felt like it was important to accelerate this. Now, the other reason why I think that we're looking at this is that we have to think about what's going on with the charter schools. We are losing a lot of kids to charters. You can see that the revenue impact of that, but we have about 3,600 that were transferred out during the year. We have about 3,700 total students in charters. Okay, 3,750, and so the revenue impact is well over $20 million. Where are the losses occurring? The 1,200 is actually in the bush feeder pattern. The bush feeder pattern you see by the heat map there is really where the biggest concentration is. Willow Ridge is less than half of that, and then you actually have Kempner as third, and then you have Marshall, Dulles, Austin, and Hightower. And so those are the campuses that we have this data on. Not campuses, but the feeder patterns that they're within. So these 4 charters represent almost 80% of our student losses. So Harmony Science, KIPP, International Leadership, Harmony Academy. So you can see those numbers there and how they've grown. The growth hasn't been staggering, but every child, every revenue amount, does matter. And so when you are losing them throughout the system, it does have a big impact. The 2 Harmony schools represent almost 45% of the losses. The losses to those are almost double what's lost to other ISDs. We lose students to other ISDs either because there's another district may have an employee that lives in our district and they drive over there and maybe they take their kids with them. We do keep track of the students that are eligible to be in Fort Bend but actually enroll in another school district, and so there are some of those. So if there's a lot going on with this slide, so bear with me here. Right now, 40%, we estimate that 40% of the children that are eligible for full day for pre-K at all, only 40% of them enroll in the half day program. And so that's 56 students. And the reason why that's not as high of a number as our other cohorts in kindergarten and others is because it's half day. It's not easy for parents to get their kids to a half day program, whether it's in AM or PM. It's just not easy. We have some that take advantage of it, over 1,400, but certainly not everybody. And so if we were to just base our estimates on those numbers alone, to go to full day just for that number of kids, we would need 20 teachers. And then if we were going to go to a 1-to-1 aid ratio, that's the scenario 1 ratio, and that's the recommended ratio if you are going to go full day pre-K, is to have 1 aide in the classroom per teacher. Right now, our teachers share an aide between classes. That's how we're structured right now. Then we would need to add 29 aides. So the next slide, the next row there is just an estimation. If 75% of the students that were eligible enrolled, this is what it would look like. The cost estimate of $8.4 million, we would need to add 99 teachers total, another 36 aides, and then if we were to expand it to the one-to-one, that staffing ratio, we would need to add 108 aides. So you can see those cost amounts there, okay? Now here's the revenue associated with it. So the incremental revenue, if we went up to 75% of the eligible population, the incremental revenue based on that half-day ADA is $2.6 million. If you add that to the $8.1 million early education allotment, that total revenue amount is 10.7. And so we're a bit above breaking even overall if you include that early allotment in there in the pre-K equation. Okay.
So, as we consider the option of full-day pre-K, knowing the benefits and also considering the prospect that the state could mandate that we offer full-day pre-K, we plan to use the 2019-20 school year to plan accordingly, and we would consider moving our expanding our half-day options, all of our half-day options into full-day options with an anticipated launch the following school year in 2021. With respect to the expansion of the Early Literacy Center model, as you know, we launched our first Early Literacy Center in the Willow Ridge feeder pattern in this school year, 18-19. In the next slide, I'll share specific expansion planning that we've done associated with the Early Literacy Center in that feeder pattern. But what we also would like to do in 1920 is to engage the communities of Marshall, Hightower, Bush, and Elkins so that we can consider a prospect of expanding that Early Literacy Center model in those feeder patterns. Again, we would spend the year engaging the community, and as a result of that and our planning efforts, we would develop a timeline and a communication plan to move forward. Specifically with the Early Literacy Center in mind, at Ridgemont, we've been working throughout the year to determine an appropriate pace for the expansion of that center. And so, as you see on the slide, we began with community engagement. In December and January, we hosted community and parent meetings where our goal was to seek feedback from the community regarding what expansion efforts they could support. During that time, they shared with us very specifically that they wanted us to consider a slower cohort expansion, which considered an opt-in provision as we currently have in place now. They also shared barriers with respect to transportation that they wanted us to consider. We took all of that feedback and information, and in February, we hosted another meeting. At that time, we had the middle of the year data to share associated with the Early Literacy Center. So we shared the data with community and parents, and we also adjusted the plan based on the feedback. We also, in March, considered transportation. So as we consider recruitment, part of the adjustment to the plan was really to consider the rising kinder and speaking specifically with parents about their intent to opt in. And so our recruitment efforts have focused on that opt-in provision. In February and March, we hosted parent meetings at the Early Literacy Center where parents were we shared the data on the middle of the year progress of the students at the Early Literacy Center, and we shared with them the opt-in provision and what their options were. Through those meetings, we've had several parents opt in. We're transitioning in March and in April to speak to individual parents and reaching out with them with correspondence. To date, we've got, as of April 8th, I should say, we've got a total of 140 kinder students registered for the ELC for the 1920 school year. 68 of them are opt-in students from either Blue Ridge, Ridgegate, or Briargate, and the other 72 are the rising kinder students from the Ridgemont Elementary. We have room for a total of 216 students. So again, we'll continue to reach out to parents to fill the remaining 76 seats. During that process, we've also engaged with parents to have them secure specific information on what they would need in terms of transportation so that we could offer that to them. And as you see there, kinder registration opened April 1st and will close on May the 17th. And so we will continue our efforts. At Blue Ridge, Ridgegate, and Briargate, we trained our ADA clerks, and we shared with them all of the information associated with the Early Literacy Center. So as they schedule appointments for kinder registration at their campuses, they share that option with parents so that they can determine whether they want their kids to attend the Early Literacy Center as kindergartners or remain at their home campus. With all of that work, we also considered staff and the resources that we need in terms of planning for 1920. And so on April the 1st, we hosted a meeting for the kinder staff that may be impacted from Blue Ridge, Ridgegate, and Briargate. And at that time, we shared with them the provisions of DKR, which allow, and we assured them that they all would retain employment with Fort Bend ISD. They could put themselves on the transfer list with specific requests, so HR could work specifically with them to place them, and or they could certainly apply for a position at the Early Literacy Center. We will continue with our hiring efforts in April, May, and in June to appropriately staff the Early Literacy Center commensurate to the new enrollment, and we will begin to prepare to transfer the furniture and instructional resources May, June, and over the course of the summer so we can get those classrooms set up. So in closing our path forward, in summary, I want to share with you that our intent is to use our 2019-20 school year to really plan for this possible full-day expansion. If the state should adopt House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 4, which would mandate pre-K, then we would need to accelerate our planning timeline to expand half-day options to full-day to launch in the fall. And then again, as I said, when we consider the early literacy model and expanding that to other feeder patterns, we would continue to use the 2019-20 school year to plan and engage those communities accordingly. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I'm going to go and open up with Mrs. Grail James. Mrs. James, do you have questions?
I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Burdine, and thank you for the nice presentation, Ms. Saavedra and Mr. Bassett. My first question has to do, and I didn't mark down the slide, but you were talking about costs for the pre-K program. You talked about how the revenue would, the revenue for the ADA, I guess, would balance, is predicted to be balanced by what the state is providing. But I didn't hear you mention about other costs associated with the program and how we would manage that. And one, I think, a primary cost might be space. Has there been any thought given to the costs around the facilities?
So these costs do include some of the initial maintenance and operation investments that would need to be made. What this doesn't have is any kind of necessarily widespread facility adjustments, that may be needed. Okay, and so we didn't have that data yet. Okay, if we were set to expand, and the Senate postponed talking about House Bill 3, their Education Committee was gonna talk about it tomorrow. They postponed it, and let's say they did get to the point where they were able to pass it quickly. Then I would recommend using potentially some of the bond 2014 contingency that we have to help us with those expenses to keep them out of the general fund, because we know the pressure that there is on the general fund. But we haven't made any kind of estimations along those lines yet.
Okay, so the bill as it stands right now is talking about an implementation in fall of 2019. So
Yes.
is that pretty firm, or could that be delayed a year?
I mean, that's in both versions of the bills that are out there. I mean, it's certainly possible whenever they when they go to conference committee or whatever else that they may say it'll be fall of 2020. But right now, that's in both of the bills.
Okay, and then a clarification on slide 11. When you were talking about the 40% of the eligible population, is that how much is currently registered right now?
Yes, that's what. So we have 1456 students in the program now attending classes on a half-day basis, and so
that's about 40%. So you're estimating then that if we went full day across the board, you would estimate it if more kids would opt in because it's a full day, but more convenience.
Right.
And so you're doing the projections at 75%.
Yes, ma'am.
Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. And then I have one more question on slide 13. And this is a question for Mrs. Saavedra. So the expansion ideas here look very focused on the east side of the district, with very little on the west side. And so could you speak to that and what's kind of the thinking behind that, and would there be consideration to add additional west side early literacy options?
Absolutely. Yes, these are our high priority feeder patterns. When we look at our literacy data, investment in these feeder patterns using the early literacy model will greatly benefit us. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't consider other feeder patterns. However, when we think about implementation timeline and the priority and where we would begin some of that conversation, these are the feeder patterns that bubbled up. But obviously, we could certainly consider that in other feeder patterns.
And that's on
okay, so go ahead.
That's on the early literacy center side of it, but we would certainly have plenty of full day pre-K classrooms available, throughout the east side of the district, and there's definitely unutilized space there that we could use to offer full day pre-K. On the west side, I'm sorry. On the west side, there's plenty of unused space that could be used for that if needed.
Okay, and I guess so to me, I guess I would like to say that it's important to continue to evaluate where the greatest need is, because I think there are kids on the west side that need support too, and we've looked at some of the numbers at those schools, and there's some gaps. So I'm just mentioning that and bringing it up that I guess as the plans move forward, we need to consider where the greatest needs are.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you, that concludes my questions.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mrs. Tossan.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. So I'm just going to piggyback on that line of questioning because I sort of see this as, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I sort of see this as two different things. The first thing is we're looking at expansion of our early literacy center model. And then the second thing we need to consider is whether we will have mandatory full day pre-K as a result of this legislative session. I mean, is that the correct way to look at it?
Yes.
I'd actually interject. I actually look at it the other way. I see it that we would look at the umbrella is the full day pre-K that would benefit all students throughout the district who are eligible, and that the early literacy center is a subset of those schools where we would start where the greatest need is because of the investment required. That would be a subset of the full day pre-K.
So that's my point, really. That's the point I'm trying to get to, is that if we have mandatory full day pre-K, we're going to have to offer to every eligible student in the district regardless of where they live.
Correct.
And so we're going to offer that at various schools all over the district to make sure that we are providing this service that is required by law, potentially, to every eligible student. And so what my point is that the other thing we're having to look at is where and how are we going to expand our early literacy center in order to tackle problems in specific feeders where we believe that this model can benefit kids. Okay, so I wanted to make that sort of distinction. So I get your analogy to the umbrella, and I agree with that. But the reason I'm trying to draw a fine point to that is because, so I do agree that we need to hone in on the feeder patterns that we believe this model will benefit the most, regardless of where they are. So I do support that. But to Mrs. James' point, we've got to make sure that we have space where is needed in order to offer the full day pre-K for eligible students. So I'll just say that. I said when we first voted on this model, the Early Literacy Center model, I was in favor of doing it now and doing it quickly and offering it to every child who needed it. And the reason I was in favor of that is because these kids don't have time. They don't have time to wait on us. So that being said, I understand why we did a pilot, and I think it is good. It's good to do that. But I am, and I think you need to engage the community quickly, and make sure that we are partnering with them, truly partnering with them. But I view my role as a governing person on this body as being one who needs to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help kids succeed. And with the data that we're seeing, the Early Literacy Center model does that. And I just want to make sure that we're offering it for as many kids as we possibly can. So I'm just going to make that statement and encourage you and support you to to proceed with this as quickly as possible. I just want to make sure that because I get questions about this, please remind us, Mr. Bassett, what eligible means. It's not full day pre-K for every 3 and 4-year-old in Fort Bend ISD. It's full day pre-K for students who are eligible.
Qualified by free and reduced acceptance, either in a reduced lunch program or free lunch program. Also special needs. Okay, they qualify regardless of income. I think if they have a parent that's deployed, okay, through the military, I think they qualify. And I'm not sure. Early language learners as well.
Early language learners. Okay, I just want to make sure that that's clear for anyone listening. I also don't want us to forget about our Early Intervention Academy, which is also a full day pre-K program, and it's not mentioned in here. And I don't like that because it is a full day pre-K program that we are seeing great benefit from, and I don't want us to forget about it. And I want us to make sure that all our recruiting efforts, and I know they are, I know we're doing our recruiting, but I want to make sure that it's mentioned in this board meeting, and that we make sure that our parents know that this option is available. And I also would like at some point to get an update on what our expansion plans are for the Early Intervention Academy. I know we're still trying to recruit students for that program. I know that we're probably still a little bit under capacity for that program, but I just don't want us to forget about it because being a parent of a child with special needs, early intervention is critically important, and this program that we have here is an incredible opportunity for families who have students with disabilities, for their children to get a leg up, a head start, really. So I don't want us to forget about it, and I wanted to mention it because that is another full day pre-K opportunity that we're offering here in Fort Bend. So I assume we're recruiting for next year, and let's make sure that we keep that at the forefront as we're talking about full day pre-K. So if they mandate this in the fall of 2019, I'm just going to say it doesn't really give districts a whole lot of time to plan, which the legislature tends to forget. Well, we tend to get criticized for not planning, and then we aren't given any time to plan. fortunately for us in Fort Bend ISD, we already have some full-day pre-K, and we're already kind of ahead of the game in doing some of this because we recognize that it's good for kids. So kudos to us, to you guys, and to us. But how is this going to accelerate the process of parent engagement, and what is that going to look like? Because I expect it to pass. I mean, don't you expect it to pass, Steve? I mean,
I expect something to pass. The timing, is anybody's guess whether or not it'd be regular session or special session.
Right.
I do expect some bill to pass.
So what is that going to look like for us when we're engaging the community and going through this process?
Well, at this point, we're going through and we're looking at all of our space options. Should we expand from half day to full day? What would be the targeted campus that could facilitate those expansion pieces? Obviously, we need to begin now because our registration is already open now for pre-K. So we would need to begin to communicate the prospect of a possible full day option. When our pre-K registration closes in May, it'll reopen again in July. By that time, we'll have a lot more information, and so we'll have another push for prospective parents to come in and register. But we will, when we determine what sites we're going to specifically target that can manage the increase in classroom space, then we can be more pointed with our communication and engaging the community.
Okay, I'd like to ask that the board be kept updated on this since it's going to be moving so quickly. And I do think, I agree with you. I think a lot of this work needs to be done now, but we really need to bring in, particularly, I think we know that the ELC, in the Ridgemont feeder, in the Willow Ridge feeder pattern, that's going to be a target community. I think we already know that. So I think it would be beneficial to go ahead and start bringing that. I think we already have a focus group or committee together. Maybe bring them in now, and they might even be able to help facilitate expansion even to other areas as we start recruiting people. So I'm just going to throw that suggestion out there. I know there was some pushback in that community when we wanted to turn the school into a pre-K one and sort of split them. So I don't know where they are right now, but I think it's good to go out and start having that conversation with them. But again, I'm going to reiterate my support for expanding this program and how sometimes that, we are limited in how we can manage space. I understand that, but I just think it's critical for our kids to have it.
I just want to, based on what you're saying, I want to make sure we're all operating from a common understanding that if the legislature passes full-day pre-K, we would expand full-day pre-K district-wide.
Right.
But we're still only planning to do a limited expansion of the Ridgemont Center for the 1920 school year, with a much broader expansion of the Early Literacy Center in the 20 school year. Because that just takes so much more and so many more teachers that you've got to have a real readiness for that. So we're not planning to push quickly the ELC model or the EIA model for this coming fall. We want to stand up the pre-K to get, because there's a lot of implications there, but still go, and I believe this is a go slow to go fast. We can plan really well a year two, and then we can stand up a few more programs probably in 20 based on the 2 years pilot and the expansion model.
So I appreciate that, and that's why I tried to make the distinction at the beginning, because I think there's going to be a lot of confusion and where we're going to house the full-day pre-K on, in those feeder patterns, and how, is there going to be any overlap with ELC? So, and you're telling me there might be some, but not really for a full expansion. So that's why I tried to make that distinction, because I think it just gets confusing. Thank you.
Okay, I have a comment just related to that. And Mrs. Tossan, I agree with a lot of what you were saying in making the distinction. But I guess also what I was getting at is if it turns out that the eligible pre-K kids are concentrated in parts, let's say in the west side of the district, then, and we feel that there's an opportunity for impact, then, because I believe there's overlap in the populations. And I guess, so they are separate, but I also think there's some efficiencies in considering it together. So that's where the overlap is. That's my comment.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you. Steve, could you just go back over on page 7? And I know you talked about it last week. When you talked about the early reading allotment or the PK offset,